Very few of us will ever have to be concerned about extraordinary demonic attacks. All of us, however, do need to be concerned how the devil attempts to attack people in the ordinary circumstances of our lives. In your marriages, your relationships with spouses and children, friends, colleagues at work and school, in your prayer life, your faith life, your moral life, and even your sacramental life. The devil wants to disrupt every phase of your life to see if he can destroy you. Temptation is at the center of ordinary activity of the devil, and the devil uses a 4-stage plan of attack on all of us in order to try to trip us up on our daily living. A lot of these thoughts of mine come from Father Luke Camelli. He was a professor up in Mundelein when I attended seminary up there from 1987 till 1980 to 1991. He wrote a little book called The Devil You Don't Know, put out probably more than like 15 years ago. But he talks a lot about the ordinary activity of the devil, and he says that the devil uses a 4-stage plan of attack against all of us in our daily living. And all of the words they begin with the letter D. So the devil begins with deception. Deception leads to division. Division leads to diversion, and diversion leads to discouragement. So on our daily journeys, we all encounter something or someone who is intelligent, concealed, powerful, destructive, and who wants to intrude on our lives in such a way that they are harmful and destructive. It's worth our while to pay attention to these attacks, for their primary purpose is to fracture our lives in such a way that we are pulled further and further away from God. And the further we are removed from God, the more we lose sense of our identity. The human person has been created in the image and likeness of God. We have the innate desire for God. St. Augustine said it best when he said, "Our hearts are restless, O Lord, until they rest in you." The devil uses his ordinary activity to try and drive a person away from God, whereby they become more isolated and more susceptible in believing the lies that the devil is presenting to them. The devil wants his lies to become the truth in the mind of the human person. So consider for a moment, have you ever struggled with any of these following examples? Have you ever found it difficult to get along with someone? Have you found yourself always being judgmental or critical towards someone? A longtime friend becomes tiresome and you think, I wish they would just go away and leave me alone. Do you find it difficult to pay attention to ordinary conversation? Have you ever used every bit of your energy to try to calm a troubled situation? Have you ever been surprised to find within yourself inclinations towards hostility, violence, or lust, maybe even the desire to exploit someone for your own satisfaction? And you think to yourself, where in the world did these thoughts or ideas come from? St. Paul put it this way in Romans 7:18 through 19. I can will what is right, but I cannot do it. For I do not do the good I desire to do, but the evil I desire not to do is what I do. We know the right thing to do, we're determined we're going to do it, and then we find ourselves doing the complete opposite thing. Deception. The devil inverts reality. He turns things inside out and upside down. He wants to pull us off track and then proceeds to present his lie as a truth. He lies. You will not die, he says, you will be like God. So when the devil lies, he speaks according to his own nature, for he is a liar and the father of lies. All of these deceitful promises have to do with the future. Gratitude always looks to the past. Love looks to the present moment, but fear looks to the future. Why do people see psychics and mediums? There's a fear of the future, and they want to have some concrete answers. So we want to be in control, and we want to know the outcome. So there's no room for hope and trust. The end result is that the devil has misled someone, and they now find themselves in the midst of scandal or depression. People are buying into the lies, and rather than owning up to them, they try to justify them, and this leads to the second plan of attack of the ordinary activity of the devil, namely division. So it begins with deception. We buy into the devil's lies, and we begin to think that his lies are the truth. But when that happens, we arrive at division. So we should not be surprised that the devil directs his energy to division and disunity. He desires to divide people from God, from each other, and even from their very selves. The devil works against our very redemption in Jesus Christ, which reconciles us to God and allows us to share in the unity of the Holy Trinity. The devil wishes that all of us would collapse with him into eternal death and everlasting alienation from God. He does this by drawing us into a world of deceit and untruth. On the night before he died, Jesus prayed, "As you, Father, are in me and I in you, may they also be in us, so that the world may believe that you have sent me. The glory that you have given to me, I have given to them, so that they may be one as we are one, I and them and you and me, that they may be completely one." John 17:21 through 23. The devil's attempt at dividing us represents the counterpoint to Jesus' triumphal work of healing, reconciling, and unifying. Jesus always wants to bring things together. The devil always wants to make things fall apart. So the devil wants to stymie us, halt us, and even paralyze us on our journey through life. He doesn't want us to bring a sense of unity to bear on our existence. He can make us feel overwhelmed, as though there is something out of our reach, something beyond our capacity, so that we will give up. He also stirs up our fear to make us feel frightened, so that we will withdraw. He can suggest that we compare ourselves with others, usually to the extent that we overestimate the abilities of others and we underestimate our own, so that we look bad in comparison. He sets us up against each other. Anger, resentment, contempt, greed, avarice. He can make us feel impatient so that we become agitated and dissatisfied. He can short-circuit us with addictive behavior like drugs and various forms of addictions or other infidelity. Think of the opioid crisis, alcohol abuse, addiction to pornography, the breakup of the family through divorce. The gospel teaches us that we will find our life when we give it back to God who gave it to us. In Mark's gospel, we read, "For those who want to save their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake and for the sake of the gospel will save it." Mark 8:35. In order to give our lives to God, we must have something to give. That is, with a sense of unity, integrity, and coherence about them. We need to have our lives in our hands if we're to be able to hand them over to God. The devil does not want us to bring the pieces of our broken lives together. If we remain fractured, we are unable to surrender ourselves to God. This brokenness leads to the third plan of attack of the ordinary activity of the devil, namely diversion. Deception leads to division, division leads to diversion. So that the devil, he desires that we divert ourselves from the pathway of God. He moved the people of Israel, who were on a journey to the promised land, away from the worship of the one true God to the worship of false gods. Exodus 32, 1 through 8. We call this idolatry, and it is still a weapon that the devil uses against us today. substituting a product of our own creation for the uncreated God. The devil's goal in diversion is to have us lose our focus and our sense of purpose and direction. And diversion can act in a very subtle way. We can be off the path of God and off that path for a very long time and not even realize it. Types of diversion. We become absorbed in a task. We fail to see the larger purpose and direction to which God is calling us. We are distracted. Think of the story of Martha and Mary, Luke 10:38 through 42. Martha, Martha, Martha. Martha is focused on what? Serving, rather than doing the more important thing of listening. She's become absorbed in the task, and she becomes filled with jealousy and anger and all those other types of things. Another type of diversion by way of contempt. We know what we are called to do, and yet we are repelled by the task at hand. Something pulls us away from what needs to be done. Think of the story of Jonah and the well. Jonah had a job to do, but he allowed himself to think, I'm not going to do this, so he tries to run away. Another type of diversion by way of the complete opposite direction. Instead of getting slightly off course, the devil gets the person to move in a completely different direction. When this happens, the original mission gets completely corrupted. Think of David and Bathsheba and Uriah the Hittite. David gets off course slightly with his wandering eye, which then causes him to give in to lust, which causes him to give in to adultery, which then causes him to give in to murder. Getting off the task and gradually succumbing to the temptations of the devil. Another type of diversion is by way of relativism. It's the sense that nothing really matters. There's no stable truth, no grounding, and there is no specific direction that is right or appropriate. The end result is that one's life becomes a jumbled, disconnected mess of bits and pieces, lacking all form and all coherence. By way of addiction, we decenter our lives on God and allow something else to take the place of God, something that demands attention, devotion, cultivation, and sacrifice, all to the detriment of everything else in life, including the most sacred relationship of family, friends, and God. Think of the story of the prodigal son. He was willing to abandon his connection with his family to go and live a life of dissipation. That sense of life of sin that he wanted was the most important thing in his life. Another type of diversion is by way of distraction. The devil wants to interrupt our communication with God, that is to say, our prayer. 4 types of distractions that affect our prayer life. Number 1, anxieties and fears about the future. That causes us to abandon our prayer life. Number 2, the offenses that we have suffered at the hands of others. We feel like we've been victimized, and then we find it hard to pray. A third type of distraction that interrupts prayer, comparing ourselves both as who we are and what we have with others. I encounter many people who say, God must not love me because I don't have a good job, I don't have a good income, I live in a bad house, I don't drive a good car. What in the world have I done to make God punish me so much? And then finally, being centered on the pleasures of the moment. Pleasure and enjoyment are not forbidden in the Christian life. However, when they become distorted, they can pull us into ourselves. Self-absorption is the danger. A good example is the rich man in Lazarus. Every day, poor Lazarus would sit outside the rich man's door. When the rich man would come out, he would just step over him as if he was nothing more than clutter in the street. Again, the rich man was focused on his own pleasure and enjoyment, not recognizing the suffering of one in front of him. So after we have followed the ordinary activity of the devil through deception, division, and diversion, we arrive at the final stage, discouragement. Discouragement. So when we have bought into the lie that has left us broken, that has taken us off the path of God, we arrive at the moment of discouragement. Discouragement has to be the most dangerous threat to the spiritual life. It is evident in the tiredness that marks the faces of so many people. It manifests itself in the people we see with no affectivity on their faces. People walking down the street, in supermarkets, restaurants, even sitting in the pews on Sunday. In Dante's Divine Comedy, there's a sign that's hung above the entrance of hell, and you know what the sign says? "Abandon all hope, ye who enter here." These words ring true for those who have been swept into the dark and deep hole of discouragement. Discouragement leads people to make decisions, to stop trying, to pull back, to do something else, or even just to come to a halt. These things are of such great interest to the devil because he knows that discouragement ultimately will derail us on our journey to God. In the Christian tradition, discouragement can be seen as acedia. It's a word that comes from the Greek word akadeo, which translates, "I don't care." Acedia speaks of things like melancholy, sloth, laziness, especially in regards to religious obligations and practices. It can be the result of things like tiredness, feeling overwhelmed, intimidation, and personal disappointment. When people have journeyed through the stages of the ordinary activity of the devil and arrive at discouragement, I believe they arrive at a crossroads. When we have bought into the lie of the devil, we find our lives broken. We're no longer on the path that God has laid out for us. We're now discouraged. We find no meaning and purpose in our life. The crossroads, another two words that begin with D. Discipleship. We can arrive at a spiritual awakening, and we can recommit ourselves to God. The other pathway leads to death. Always spiritual, but even sometimes it can be physical. Think of the growing trend of suicide. So what do people do when they are discouraged? How do we reach out to them? I believe this is the call of the new evangelization of which St. John Paul II spoke of. So what should be our response to the ordinary activity of the devil? The gospel presents us with a remedy. It proposes that on our journey through life, we should expect struggles and disappointments, but that our fears be properly aligned. In other words, we need to fear God and not the devil. And we talked earlier today about what the fear of God really means. We are amazed at God. We're able to see all the blessings in our lives and all the wonderful things that God is doing. Even in the midst of our disappointments, in the midst of our times that we're tired, we still see how God is working in our lives, striving to bring purpose and meaning to our existence. So we need to hold to confidence. We need to stay the course. We need to have confidence in the Holy Spirit, who will lead, guide, and direct those experiencing the ordinary attacks of the devil. And most certainly, we constantly need to identify with Jesus Christ. In the Christian context, we cannot speak of evil or the devil apart from our reference to our faith in Jesus Christ, the one who has conquered the power of evil through his death and resurrection. So in the face of the ordinary activity of the devil, we must always look to the healing and redeeming work of Jesus Christ, who is the way, the truth, and the life. Again, it is our relationship with Christ that gives ultimate meaning to our existence. And without that relationship with Christ, we find ourselves completely adrift.